Donald Trump and Kamala Harris are running for president in 2024 after Joe Biden recently dropped out of the race. Today, let's compare how different their financial situations are. Trump obviously has more money, but he invests it vastly different than Harris, and where they have their net worth is also extremely different. How do you relate to each person? Do you relate more to one or the other? And how do you handle your own money? And speaking of your own money, after we compare these two politicians' finances, I'll share a couple ways that we can invest based on our own political beliefs. Hey, I'm Brendan. I've been investing for 15 years. My wife and I are on track to retire 20 years early because we became millionaires last year at 37, and I make videos for you every weekday or almost every weekday here on YouTube. First, let's talk about the Harris family finances. Depending on where you look, the actual amount of money that Harris and her husband have kind of varies. It's somewhere between $3.6 million and $6.3 million that they have in assets. If we take the average of that, it's just under $5 million they have sitting there in assets. What we mean by that is cash in the bank, stocks, ETFs, anything they have invested in the stock market, kind of like liquid assets, if you will. And it seems unlikely, but as far as I can find in my own research, they only own one piece of real estate, which is their primary home. I could definitely be wrong there, but as of right now, it seems to be worth about $5 million. And based on my calculations, they've got about $900,000 left on their mortgage, which is a very low interest rate, and it's an adjustable rate mortgage, which typically isn't that commonly recommended by the personal finance experts and people that I've read. We like to recommend something more like a fixed interest loan that you know you're getting into something you can count on that it's not going to adjust over time, but they're in their second consecutive arm under 3% interest. Another chunk of her net worth that we know about is that she's going to receive state pension benefits, and they're going to be about $4,000 per month once she turns 60. So if she lives for another 25 years after that, that's going to be worth something like $1.2 million. Now, is that actual liquid net worth that's part of what she's worth right now? Definitely not, but it's something that she can count on in the future. And the exact benefit she'll receive for being vice president isn't exactly spelled out as far as the research I could find, but she's going to have some kind of retirement compensatory benefit, I would think, for having served that role. So depending on exactly what that asset number is, the baseline net worth that she's got is probably in the high $8 million mark, potentially tickling the feet of $12 million, but a safe average would be somewhere around $10 million. Investopedia claims that makes her not quite in the top 1% of Americans because that would require a $13.7 million net worth. So maybe in a few years, she'll be up there in the top 1%, but not quite there. So now if we break down exactly where her net worth is, we can see that the vast majority of it is in their assets and in their real estate. Actually, real estate's a little bit bigger chunk. The only obvious debt that we can see is their mortgage, which leaves them with a pretty healthy total. Broken down another way, we can see it in a pie chart format, which is showing that basically half of their entire net worth is in real estate. As different as she is to Donald Trump, I think she'll have a common ground with him in terms of how much they both value real estate. And I couldn't find an exact breakdown of how she invests her money, but based on the research that other people have done in the articles that I've read, they're saying it's very vanilla. It's conservatively allocated. Basically, half of it is in stocks, a third of it is in cash, and the rest is in bonds. So if we break that into something a little bit nicer looking, we can see the breakdown here. And granted, her and her husband are not spring chickens anymore. It's not like they're 23-year-olds with their first jobs and they have a lot of headroom to be aggressive for a long time. But still, this is a very conservative portfolio. We're talking about only half in equities. The other half in bonds and cash leaves them with an extremely conservative position. If we actually break down that math based on the average amount of assets she might have, somewhere in that range that people are able to kind of publicly publicize, that means they've got about $2.5 million in actual equities and the rest is in cash and bonds. I mean, sitting on $1.6 million in cash, it's a lot of cash doing nothing for you. I mean, granted, right now, hopefully it's in something like a high yield savings account where they can get at least 5%, 5.5%, maybe if they're lucky. But by and large, that's a boat without an engine. So from everything I can see, they're set up in a format that's not that different from an average American or somebody who's a little above average. Not the total numbers, but more like the breakdown. You know, the average American has the vast majority of their net worth in their primary home. And despite that number seeming pretty high, $10 million, they're pretty run-of-the-mill average in terms of how they've handled their money and where it actually is. Predictably, Donald Trump is not average in really any of the way that he's done money stuff. And from the research that I've found, his numbers have a lot more zeros behind them. The difference in net worths here is bigly. The estimated value of Trump Media and Technology Group, $5.6 billion with a B. Real estate, $1.1 billion. Golf clubs and resorts, which I guess somehow isn't real estate, $810 million. Cash and other assets, $510 million. And legal liabilities that are at least known and disclosed, minus $540 million, which leaves a total net worth of almost $7.5 billion. If we compare a similar breakdown to what we did with Harris, we can see the vast majority of his net worth is in an actual business that he owns. And whenever you see someone with a very, very high net worth, typically this is a pretty common breakdown. The vast majority of their net worth is in the company company that they've started or they've owned. This is where you can get outsized returns on your own net worth and your own effort, because even if you invest well, even if you buy a great house, odds are you're not going to be worth hundreds of millions of dollars or billions of dollars unless you start your own business. Even that massive $510 million in cash and other assets that aren't real estate and aren't his business is a pretty small chunk of the overall pie here. The same information shown a different way in a pie chart that's probably a little bit more relatable for us in terms of a format we can digest. You can see just how much that proportion of Trump media is. Real estate's very, very healthy, but actually the smallest chunk of his positive net worth numbers here are actually cash and assets. And I think typically that's what we assume whenever we see somebody who's really wealthy. We go, oh man, they must have a lot of cash and stocks and things that are actually spendable funds, right? That's really not the case. And you see it here displayed with the former president. So of that $510 million that Donald Trump has in terms of assets that aren't real estate, they aren't properties, they aren't his business, where does that go? How does he actually spend it? If we remember, the Harris family is a lot of cash, a lot of bonds, and the other half is in stocks. Believe it or not, Donald Trump is even more conservative, but I think that probably makes sense based on his life situation. More than half of his liquid assets, if you will, are in bonds. About another third is in treasuries, and only a small slice is in stocks. He's got tiny little fractions of mutual funds, of cash, of gold, things like that. But by and large, this is an extremely conservative position. And I think for somebody like him, who's got so much of his net worth in these kind of properties, in these kind of businesses that require a lot of capital, I think for him, it really makes sense to have a very conservative asset position, cash position, if you will. He doesn't need to rely on stocks to provide him outsized returns, because compared to the rest of his life, the stocks aren't going to perform well anyway, at least in theory, if things go well with the businesses, right? So for him, it behooves him to just have this money sitting there on the sidelines ready to deploy if and when the businesses deem it necessary, because the businesses are where he's going to grow his net worth. Not like he really needs to grow his net worth anymore, but in theory, if that's the goal, this makes sense. So between our two candidates, who do you kind of resonate with more just on the financial sense? Not asking about political affiliation here because it's not that kind of video. We're talking purely financial. Who do you agree with more in terms of their overall philosophy as far as where they've actually put their money? A little bit more on the reasonable, conservative, average American side, which is where Harris is, where a big chunk of your net worth is in your home. The rest is in investable assets, but a lot of that's very conservatively held as well. Or are you more of like a, hey, let's go all in, bet the farm, you only live once, put everything into something that we can control and curate ourselves in terms of a business or something else that's really under your control, and kind of follow Donald Trump's lead in that way? Let me know in a comment. But also, we need to talk about the ways that you can actually invest your own money that mirrors your political beliefs. I just found out about these things this week, and it's kind of a fascinating thing that you can choose to do. These are political themed ETFs. And so what that means is, for example, this one, DEMZ, the Democratic Large Cap Core ETF. It tracks some of the largest U.S. companies that have given on average at least 75% of corporate or employee political contributions to Democratic political action committees or candidates in the past 3 election cycles. Basically, you're cherry picking companies who have supported Democratic candidates. And at time of writing the article where I found this information, the S&P 500 had gained 13.2% in terms of growth this year. This Democratic ETF, DEMZ, had gained 14.4%. So it actually did a little bit better. Now, is that in any kind of correlation to the political affiliations? I probably doubt it. I think it probably has to do more with how the companies have performed. But on the flip side of that, there's also the American Conservative Values ETF, ACVF. And what that does is track a bunch of different companies that are perceived, at least, to align with conservative values. And at the time this article was written, it had climbed 12.4% so far in 2024. So if you literally want to put your money where your mouth is and align your investing with your political beliefs, at least in the way that these themes are structured, you can actually do that with these 2 ETFs. You can also mirror how members of Congress invest. I know there's different suggestions going around right now that say that members of Congress shouldn't be allowed to invest because maybe they have insider information, but that's exactly why these couple of ETFs were founded. The Subversive Unusual Whales Democratic Trading ETF, NANC, wink wink, and the Subversive Unusual Whales Republican Trading ETF, KRUZ, Cruz, wink wink, they're both set up to copy the exact stock investments of the current sitting Democratic and Republican members of Congress and their spouses. A lot of people have complained about the outsized returns that certain people in Congress have gotten, and so if you can't beat them, join them. At least that's the theme of these particular ETFs. And thus far, NANC has risen 15.7% this year at time of the article writing, and KRUZ had rose 9%. So they did pretty well, right around the range of the S&P 500, but they haven't drastically over or underperformed. The management fees for these are fairly healthy though, ranging between 0.5% and 0.8%. So just know if you invest in them, that's going to be a drawdown on your actual return, no matter how it performs. Even if it gets a 0% return this year, you're still going to have to pay that fee, which is going to make your return actually go negative. It's not that hard to find an index fund or an ETF with a fee under 0.1%. So weigh that in mind. Invest however you want to with your own money, because these videos are not financial advice. I just thought it'd be interesting to compare and contrast these two candidates and to talk about how you can invest based on your political beliefs, because we're in the middle of this crazy election cycle. If you made it this far and this is one of the first videos you've seen of mine, I normally make videos about personal finance and investing, specifically around reviewing different investing services or different investing strategies and things that you can do as an everyday person. I'm not trying to talk about really risky, crazy things you can do with your money. I'm trying to kind of stay in the baseline of what's going to accomplish the most for the average person, and also share my own personal progress along the way. So I've got a dividend investing series where every month I post my actual returns, how much I've gotten, where the money's come from, everything that's happened really transparently. And I'm trying to make this my full-time gig. So if you want to see more videos from me, then subscribe. I really like axes as like a fun exercise activity whenever I can get up into pine trees. And so sometimes I start a video with an axe. It's also a bit analogous to the idea that we could sharpen the axe together. So I've got an axe sharpening stone. We can sharpen our axes. We can learn together, because it's more wise to spend a few hours sharpening your axe than it is to just go out there and start chopping a tree with a dull axe. I think there's an old alleged Abraham Lincoln quote in there somewhere. But if you want to watch another video of mine, I'll put one down here for you. Otherwise, you can subscribe right here with this little circular button of my face. I also sometimes do a secret comment word. So for today, the secret comment word will be law, because lawmakers are involved in elections and regulations with Congress members and things like that. So if you made it to the end of the video, if you enjoyed the video, if you just want to be silly and make a sentence with the word law in it, you can leave that secret comment word in there. Thank you to channel members for supporting me, and I'll see you guys next time. Bye.